So next up we've got Anton Blijlevens, who is going to be our moderator for the next session. Anton's going to be joined by Allan from Life Science Angels, and they'll be discussing the importance of IP in building angel venture value. Welcome, Anton.
I'm a member of the Ice Angels, and I've also been an IP lawyer for 22 years now, helping startups with their IP strategy, both in New Zealand and also in Hong Kong and Singapore. My background is in mechanical engineering, so I look after a lot of mechanical technology and clients in that area. It'd be interesting to actually do a survey at some stage just of startups and to see what the mix of intellectual property rights are that they are relying on. And of course it's going to vary from sector to sector very significantly. In the life sciences sector in particular, that we'll hear from Allan on in a minute, patents are really vital. And it's the lifeline for ongoing funding and for a very strong exit strategy. In the ICT sector, patents, they can have mixed success, and certainly in the software, with software inventions, it's now becoming very difficult around the world to get patent protection. So it'll be interesting to do that exercise at some stage. But Allan is the main speaker here today in this session on IP. Allan is the founder of the Life Sciences Angels in the United States, and he's going to share some of his experiences and tips and war stories on IP. Allan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this kind of an audience, right, where this is us. And this is you know, any one of you can stand up and pretty much give any one of these talks. What a cool situation to be in. So I've been asked to say some interesting things about intellectual property. I couldn't actually think of anything interesting to say about intellectual property. So it's going to be very short, as a matter of fact. No, so seriously, very interesting the way you all just put your hands up and kind of the way the last panel ended. So I will use the example of life sciences, but I don't mean this to be a life science conversation. I'm jealous as hell, I confess, that software basically doesn't use IP the way many of our other disciplines do use IP. But I can guarantee you that clean tech, hardware, semiconductor design, medical device, biotech, they all use IP in a pretty profound way. And in fact, they use it in a fundamental way that's important to entrepreneurs and important to investors. We mentioned it yesterday, but you know, it's kind of obvious. In a medical device company, and certainly in a biotech company, maybe in a diagnostics company, you don't have any customers. You don't have any revenue. So what's an acquirer exactly going to acquire? What they're acquiring is your IP. What they're acquiring is the product that you've developed, done your clinical trials with, and proven out, that is protected by your IP. So I can pretty much guarantee you, in the context of life sciences, the value of your exit is directly proportional to the strength of your intellectual property. Period. Full stop. If you find a cool, compelling clinical need, and you have an absolutely perfect technological solution, and you can't get good intellectual property coverage on that solution, you're dead. Don't put a penny into it. You're dead. It doesn't matter that it works. It's not software. It's a whole different ball game. So our ball game is an IP-driven ball game. So I just want to kind of start off with that point. It's interesting that the customers, the hospitals, the patients, the doctors in these cases don't really care what's in the box, what's in the black box that you sell. They have a clinical problem, they have a need, and you have a solution. Whether your solution is microwave or laser or RF or ultrasound or whatever it is, they really don't care. That's up to you. But it gives you the opportunity to develop a strong IP portfolio based on whichever one of those you can get the most coverage on. So the major difference between life science and tech is all about inventing something, finding something, discovering something, and then figuring out what it's good for, right? That's tech. That's how you develop a business model in tech. In life science, it's the other way around. In life science, you start with a clear, compelling clinical need. You spend all of your time verifying and validating the clinical need. You make sure there's a market, you make sure there's a need, you make sure you understand your customer, you do all the stuff that you know how to do. Then you find the best technology that solves that need. You don't care what the technology is. You're not trying to make something work. You're trying to solve a problem. You're trying to solve the customer's problem. So it gives you the chance to jigger your IP. As you're going through this, you try some stuff. Yeah, it works with ultrasound. Yeah, it works with RF too. But you say, oh wow, I can get much better patent coverage on ultrasound than I can on RF. Go with ultrasound, right? That's your choice. Now you can actually build your company and build your business model and build value based on developing a stronger IP portfolio. How do we deal with that? What do we do? We're angels. We're angels investing in the first round. So let's start with, you don't have any IP. Well, shit, that's a problem. If I need it and I don't have any, what am I going to do about that? Okay, so you should have figured this out. You should have filed, I don't know what you do down here. This panel will be able to explain it. In the US, we would file provisionals. But you need to have done enough work on your concept that you can lay out your claims in an intellectual property filing and at least have a claim set and description of what it is you intend to do and how you intend to do it. That's really pivotally important for two reasons. It's pivotally important to us as investors for due diligence. I'll come back to that in a minute. But it's especially important for the entrepreneurs as well in terms of talking to strategics and talking to customers. You have to go out and talk to customers. But you can't go out and talk to customers until you got your IP filed. That's a really bad idea, right? Unless you're not talking, you're just listening, which is fine. Listening to customers is better than talking to customers anyway. But okay, so you get out there, you do that, you have some stuff filed. Now what do? We're angels. Oh, this is gonna hurt. Well, I was just gonna say we can't afford patent counsel. All right, so I'm not gonna say that. I'm not gonna say that. But in general, we probably don't spend much money on patent lawyers trying to figure out what is the strength and scope of patents. So in our group, we're fortunate we have some patent lawyers in our group. That's a big help. And so we can rely, as all of us do in our angel groups, on our own members to help with diligence. We've got a couple patent agents too, who are particularly good. But look, you're not trying to be a patent lawyer here. You're trying to understand, do they have credible claims for credible stuff that read reasonably, that make sense? You're not trying to figure out the subtleties of patent law. We have terrific experts and great people we can go to answer all the technical questions we have about patent law. You're just trying to figure out, do these people understand they need it? Have they taken a stab at it? Does it look plausible and reasonable? Read it yourself and just see what the main claims are. It's just not that hard to do. They're written in English, at least in America, and here, and go with that. That's enough. You don't have to you don't have to have issued patents. You don't have to have definitive answers to your patent problems. You just need to make sure that you've really looked into that and have that checked. That happens to be particularly critical, again, in life sciences because the big guys play really rough here. In a lot of industries, you see people cross-license. It's not untypical in a number of industries for people to make advances in this area and license it out to their competitors and for the industry to kind of bootstrap its way like that. Life science doesn't do that. They slit one another's throats over IP. Absolutely. They will never, ever license out a patent. If they can screw their buddy, that's the whole game, right? You're trying to buy competitive advantage as a med tech or a biotech company. It's all about competitive advantage. So that tells you two things. First, you as the entrepreneur or the early stage person going to your customer to talk to them to get advice, if they can get around your patent, they will. There is no reason to buy you except your IP. If they cannot buy you and still access your IP, or IP like your IP, or IP that's better than your IP, or more, or the same as your IP, you did it one way, they do it another way, they will 100% of the time do it the other way. So they will go around you. You have to really button this up and get it focused on before you do anything with them. Number two, when they then have it, there are, as you know, 3 tiers of IP. You've got enabling IP. You can do what it is you wrote up and claim you can do. I got that. I can do it. I've got a patent on this thing. Then there's freedom to operate, which says I can do it and I don't have to license anything from him. I actually can do it on my own and I don't have to pay anybody else. Then there's blocking. Then there's IP that says, not only do I have it, and not only can I practice it without paying anybody, I can block everyone else in the world from doing this thing every other way there is to do it. Guess what acquirers pay the most for? Right? It's a screw your buddy game. It really is. So when you're talking to your customers and your strategics, make sure you've buttoned up your patents, not just you filed your core patent. Make sure you've buttoned up all the aspects of your patent, because they are going to be looking hard at how can I get around you, what have you missed, what parts haven't you patented, what parts can I get a hold of that are important in your chain. They're going to go through that whole thought process. So you need to go through that thought process ahead of working with them. The impact of doing that, unfortunately, gets expensive really fast. So we've got a company now in our portfolio. Unfortunately, it raised 18 million bucks, missed its clinical human endpoint, and collapsed. But we know why it collapsed, and the founders have figured out how to do it again and actually make it work. So we're going to restart that company, even though we've spent 18 million bucks doing it. I was going to say call me stupid, but I won't, because you will. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, guilty. But so they've got, the good news is they've got a terrific patent portfolio. So I know they have a patent portfolio. They have 25 issued patents in quite a number of countries around the world. So I know they have a really important, broad, blocking patent portfolio. The bad news is that baby costs 20,000 bucks a month to own. So if I handed it to you free today and said, here you go, to maintain it was 20,000 bucks a month. That's not filing any new patents. That's just maintaining the 20 as they issue in various countries. Well, I'm sure the experts will talk about that. But so this stuff's very expensive. So one question I think you've got to face as a small country like this and resource constrained is, where do you patent? Why do you patent? What countries do you file in? And how do you handle the fact that, yes, you're going to need a scope of coverage, but that scope of coverage gets exponentially expensive pretty quickly on. So the only other point I want to make, and then let's get on to the panel, which will be a lot more fun than this, is China. And will be experts here on China. China is an interesting paradox in a number of ways, of course, but in particular on the IP side. On the one hand, well, let's not go there. On the other hand, they really are focusing on IP now. And I can guarantee, well, my experience in China, will have people with more experience, but my experience in China is if you're taking something to China, the first thing they're going to ask you is, have you filed IP in China? It's really become a big deal in China. It affects investment, it affects commercialization, and it's going to affect acquisition. So ironically, for a country that hasn't shown much respect for intellectual property to date, they are wildly focused on it now. So that's another thing you're going to have to figure out in terms of complexity and expense to handle these. So just making the point that this is one of those things that one would rather not think too much about, because it is getting a bit down in the weeds on these things. But in some sectors of investing, it's absolutely fundamental to be able to do what you want to do. So with that, we should move on.
China is actually a pet project of mine. I spend a lot of time in China at the moment, and it's phenomenal what's going on up there in terms of IP. There's 1.2 million patents filed in China in 2013. Now compare that to 600,000 in the States and only 6,000 here in New Zealand. The Chinese are now the second largest users of the European patent system, next to the Europeans, having displaced the Americans, who were in second place back in 2012. We've got got Allan, of course, and David Chen from AngelVest from China. We've got David Hugues from Plant and Food, and we've got Jim from the Brisbane Angels. And each of these gentlemen have been asked to share 3 pieces of wisdom on IP from their own experiences. Maybe some war stories or some success stories. So would you like to kick things off?
Sure.
Great.
So I'll continue where Allan left off. He set the stage brilliantly for China. And I've been in China for about 10 years. And before I became an angel investor, I was actually a corporate guy for a Silicon Valley company called AMD, Advanced Micro Devices. So those of you who know the semiconductor space, AMD is the small competitor to Intel. So if you look at your laptop, your PC, it's typically powered by Intel. They own 80% of the microprocessor market share. AMD typically commands 20%, right? So it's a duopoly. So when I was doing corporate development for AMD in the Valley, they sent me on a project to China, right? It was at that time to deliver or license the x86 semiconductor technology to China because AMD needed the IP to use it as a strategic weapon against Intel globally and more importantly China at that point in time. Right? So the strategy was actually to use IP as a weapon, a strategic weapon to kind of penetrate the market and use it as a negotiation tool to say, here, we're going to give you this license for this x86 technology and you're going to give me other stuff, for example, market access. Right? So when we did that deal, it really is about the IP, how we could license that IP in some ways, older IP, albeit, to China, so they could use that effectively to use the basis of that IP to launch their own development of the x86 microprocessor. So if you look back in 2005, that was the goal, but if you look at where we are today, they're far from it because it takes a lot of know-how to actually make a semiconductor chip, right? But the point is that back then, we were in conversations with the Ministries of Science and Technology and other folks about how to file patents, the importance of IP. They were kind of at the early stages at that point in time, but as we observe today, China has really come to the curve. They're one of the most prolific patent filers around the world today. So actually, you're absolutely right in the sense that back then, and we've seen there's a lot of scary thoughts about China, the disrespect for IP, the stealing of IP, etc. But having said that, I think they've come up the curve in terms of learning how to play the game and trying to use IP globally as a strategic tool to kind of benefit, their own companies and also to hopefully be a global player. And we can talk about angel investing as well. So, right now we've invested in a number of companies that have IP. If you look at the early stage nature of companies, say what is the value, right? If it's got customers, if it's got prototype, if it's got engineering samples, if it's got software, well, there's value there. And in some sectors, the value really is in the technology. It's in the IP, right? So we recently did a robotics company. They've got some great IP, and the thing is, they were a US-based company. What we wanted to do is to take them to Hong Kong, make them offshore. So one of the strategies that we actually implemented was an exclusive licensing agreement with the parent company in the United States. And a way to do that is really to kind of say, well, we're going to be the exclusive licensee offshore for that license, and also have the parent company enter a non-compete. So when I look at IP, it's not just a legalistic perspective. It really is a tool that we use to protect our value as investors in the company. And then that value is important because as you take that value to build upon other value, such as acquiring customers and building more product, then that value will persist to be the value that you continue to build for an exit, hopefully, down the road. So there, from a cross-border, from an international perspective, I think that's important to keep in mind as you think about licensing IP from the United States.
Thank you. So we heard from Deborah Hall at the start that New Zealand is a great place to start a business. And to some extent, because of the number of patents that are being filed here in New Zealand, there's also a lot of freedom to operate. You're less likely to get sued for patent infringement than in the States. There's 100 times more patents being filed in the States than there are in New Zealand, 200 more in China, so we know. So how does a startup in China, for example, deal with freedom to operate and freedom to operate risks? Here in New Zealand, the tendency is for some searching to be done around freedom to operate, but because the risks are pretty low in terms of launching your business here, we don't tend to spend a lot of time on freedom to operate risks with our startups. But in China, how do you find
Well, I haven't seen a whole lot of companies in China that are looking at the dimensions such as freedom to operate in terms of their patent filings. It's primarily the international companies that come in with a concept and are able to deploy that for their companies in China.
Because, I mean, freedom to operate searching is expensive, and startups just normally can't afford it, and that's the main reason why it's done very lightly at the start. And as you grow towards an exit strategy and potential purchasers start doing due diligence, then, you need to have some more clarity around freedom to operate and those risks.
I will say that in most cases, again, in our sector, but in most cases, these people are scientists or engineers. And in most of those cases, they live and die by peer-reviewed journals, and most of those journals refer to whatever patents exist in the area. And some of the best people on earth to read those patents are those scientists and engineers. So while maybe they can't get a formal freedom to operate, it sure is the right question for all of us to ask as investors. Tell me about what you've done as the founders of the company to look at the other patents that are out there, and what have you found and what should I be worried about? That's a completely legitimate topic of conversation.
Okay, Dave, you got some?
Yeah, so let me share 3 war stories for you. Just to get onto the right page, first of all, though, all businesses have a whole pile of vital ingredients, but at least 3 of them are the people, the physical assets, and know-how. And within each of those category classes, not all things are created equal. Some people you'll want to have on your payroll and you want to keep really close to your company. Others you'll be quite happy to contract in. Some assets you'll want to own. Others you'll be quite happy leasing in. Some bits of know-how will be absolutely central to your business and creating value within your business. The trouble with that is, and here's my first lesson, you don't know until afterwards, in hindsight, which bits of know-how were really critical, particularly at a really early stage. My own experience on this, trying to commercialize a process technology, and we thought the value driver for this process technology was that it let you split a manufacturing process into 2 parts. One close to raw material, one close to customer. So you should have logistics, supply chain, and flexibility savings there. That should generate the value. Completely wrong. We found that out halfway through commercializing. What actually generated all of the value, and it was orders of magnitude more value than we thought of before, was that it let you use non-traditional raw materials. Materials that people hadn't thought of being used in this process before, and because of that, there was some fantastic tariff loopholes around the world where you could get these raw materials in at a fraction of the price, generated a vast amount more money. So we learned the piece of know-how that we thought was critical for this business, generating value. Yeah, there's a little bit of value in that. A completely different set that evolved as we went on, generated all the value. So the second lesson I learned, and it's linked quite closely to that one, is while protecting your IP is really quite important, acquiring new IP as you go along is just as important. So a quick war story around that. A business I was working with had a major US competitor. They had a fantastic patent book. They had a whole lot of really good patents, interlocking patents that looked like a blocking set of patents. And that was actually the perceived wisdom of the industry. Everyone looked at that and said, don't compete against these guys. They have a dominant low-cost manufacturing position. You cannot win because of this patent position. And they'd got there through quite aggressive litigation and merger and acquisition. So we followed that. Every time they turned up on our territory, the company I was working with would retreat. They would retreat to a high-value niche because they'd say, can't beat them. We found out again we were completely wrong, and we found that out when we ran a patent hack for a day. We called in a pile of interesting people, said help us think about how you might make this product in a low-cost way. By the end of the day, we had quite a range of technologies which weren't covered by these blocking patents. Quite quickly actually filed 2 provisional patents off that session, went on to develop commercial manufacturing processes and products. So the lesson I learned from that was, well, actually acquiring IP, having an IP acquisition capability is just as important as actually locking down IP. And you often can get quite fixated on either locking down your own IP and thinking you can block people with it, or alternatively thinking you're blocked out when you're not. Yep. And that brings me to my third point, that if acquiring IP is really important, it's quite possible to win an IP negotiation, particularly for a startup company, yet lose the IP acquisition war. So personal case study on this one too. There was a startup company evolved. There were some researchers had been working in a field for quite a number of years, and they got really excited when the startup turned up saying, actually, we've seen some of the stuff you're doing. We want to create a business in this space. A lot of goodwill generated. There was a lot of dialogue around, hey, we can work together. collaborate. You can help you do future research, give you some market intel, even do some future follow-on licensing deals. So that was fantastic. Built this big war chest of goodwill between the startup company and the potential knowledge provider, IP provider for it. And then came the IP negotiation. They needed a license to create their minimum viable product to start their business. It was a long, drawn-out negotiation. As the negotiation went on, it was really a war of attrition. The scope of the deal just contracted. The value in the deal got smaller and smaller and smaller until eventually a deal was done that would allow the startup company to go out there and test its MVP. But that was just about all that it did. Now, from the perspectives of the two parties, the startup company probably thought that was a good negotiation. We had to part with very little money on that. It's actually a cheap access to this technology. We get to do what we need to do as a startup and prove it. For the research provider, it actually felt pretty bad. Everyone was pretty flat. They thought, hey, we went into this with an expectation of a great future relationship. It's actually been nickel and dimed down to nothing. All looked pretty good for a while from the startup's perspective. They went out, they started proving this model, and they did what startup companies do, really focused on the market, proving their product, building their product, didn't give another thought to the research provider. Hey, when we've proven this product and we want to come up with the next product, we can go back to those guys. They'll still be there. They've been working in this field for years. They're not going anywhere. It was quite a rude shock when the research provider rang up the CEO of the startup company to say, look, one of your potential competitors just rang us up. They've just put a very large cash offer on the table for a whole lot of adjacent IP that we think you guys might want. So let's have a discussion. The CEO of the startup company says, well, actually, we've actually got very little cash, so there's no way we can match the cash offer. What have I got left? Well, we could tell a good story about a great future relationship we could have. So my point is, look, you really think carefully about your IP negotiations, because knowledge acquisition is just as important. You can lose a knowledge acquisition war through a successful IP negotiation. So there's kind of my 3 points. That you never know until hindsight which IP you're actually going to need. You can only tell after the event what's going to be important. Secondly, knowledge acquisition is just as important as protection. And then thirdly, you can lose the knowledge acquisition war through one bad IP negotiation if you're not careful. The takeout for people here in the room, for the companies that you've invested in, ask the question, what sort of relationship have you got with the people that might bring the IP that you need in the future? Because you don't know what that's going to be. If they don't give you a good answer about activities they're taking to build working relationships, to engage with those people, to build bridges with those people, then they're probably shutting themselves into a cul-de-sac, and they might find themselves in the position that CEO of the startup I was just talking about found themselves in.
Thank you. I was just talking to Allan before outside and just reflecting on that some startups pull the patent trigger far too early. They have at the very early stage of a startup, they've got this broad concept, and they say, well, we need to file this patent for this broad concept. It's a stage where they can least afford patent protection, and it's also usually the enabling developments that are created over the years that's where the most valuable IP exists, and it's really those things that patent protection should be put in place for. Okay, so Jim, your 3 pieces of wisdom.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about three companies. I won't mention names, but they're important lessons for me. 2 of them are successful, and I believe will be very good exits, and 1 was a terrible loss. So I'll get over the loss one first. The issue with this company, and by the way, for all 3 companies, I was on the board for all of them. I'm only on the board of 1 of them now, so I had intimate knowledge of what was going on with patenting. Now, with the first one, it was a medical device, excellent patent position, except we hadn't really thought through the strategy of linking patenting to regulatory and to product design. So you just can't do the patents. You've got to work out how they fit together and where you're taking the company. And what happened here was that the moment we're going out into the big market, the people who we thought were going to be partners weren't going to be partners because their regulatory and clinical trials had to go right back to the beginning. they were basically asking them to take current products and start again with our system. That's a dumb place to be. There was a lot of other things, so we found ourselves having to go away from a partnering, selling to a big pharma with a medical device and go out into looking to the consumer world. We had no idea on that, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but the whole thing sunk and I lost a lot of money. Now this was pre-Brisbane Angels. The second one is also a pre-Brisbane Angels, but it's travelling extremely well. I used to be the chairman of that company. It's now relocated to Seattle. It's in the area of biomarkers, in the area of sepsis, diagnostics using immune response, not pathogen response. A very unique position. And we have, well, I still say we because I'm a major investor, but the board and the management team have continued to do very well. Now, the company, when I and another angel investor started, the valuation was $1.5 million. The big thing about this company is it's embraced building on patents, defensive patents, current patents, patent IP protection. It has a lot of positions on its portfolio. Now, to date, I think it's probably spent just under $4 million. Now, put that into relativity. We started at a $1.5 million valuation. It's up to about $4 million in spending on patents. And as Allan was talking about later, the monthly bill is right up there to keep them valid. But the post-val, that was just the last post-val that'll take it through to exit, the last post-valuation was $35 million. All through building on patents. Very smart thinking. Now, the CEO, she's excellent, and the people in the company, they really understand what they need to do with the patents. It's going through to exit soon after the regulatory gets passed in the US. The final one is one that I and Brisbane Angels and Melbourne, there's a few of us that are in it. And what we've done here is technology platforms do work, and you can, a lot of people get a little bit afraid of how you can license technology platforms and you can do something there and something over here. But in this particular case, the way we look at the company is we've got the product side we've got the technology side of it, and we've got a spin-off called the product side. The product side happens to be a probiotic juice. And it all comes out of the technology side, which is all microencapsulation. In the technology side, we've licensed off, we've completed 2 successful licenses to big companies. We're in negotiation for 2 other licenses on the technology side. In an area that we knew we could do a whole lot more, we've spun it off into another company for the consumer side. And it's a probiotic drink. It's got patent position, so people can't attack it, and we're taking it to market. So the way that all happened was that the board and the management team, I mean, one of my co-directors, he's a patent attorney. The other guy, he's done lots of licensing. So everyone knew how to do licenses. And what we did with the licensing side, a lot of people might say, well, you've got 4 licenses in play, and there can be a lot of confusion there when you're talking about one platform, but we've worked out, it's not a geographical carve-out, it's all about the product carve-out. The technology can be carved out into 4 products, and there's no clashes with them. So, and the way we've now got a program whereby if we're talking license, we've got it all laid out, exactly the terms we're offering and how it'll be done. And we're talking to big companies with this, but it's been well thought through. And so, the issue for angel investors, though, when you're licensing, it's a royalty flow back. We do get a license fee up front, and we get a milestone fee on the first of the 2 successful licenses in about 2 years' time, which is pretty good. But the exit, there's no exit there. It's the licensing coming, the royalties coming back. But on the spin-out company, there's an exit. So the board and the investors, some of our investors we spoke to all feel it's a good way to go. And so I guess in summing, you've got to think about, you've got to have a board and management team that embrace good IP. And you've got to think it through. And the worst mistake I've made is not thinking it through in one, and the fact that I've been involved with the other two companies that are thinking it through, I'm going to be successful because of it. You know, the heading is called about building value through patent IP. The other thing that we should add to that is retaining and sustaining value. And that's very important when a company thinks of IP that way. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, guys. So thank you for sharing your pearls of wisdom there. We've got about 5 minutes for questions from the audience.
Just interested in what the international experience is, in dealing with university IP.
Yeah, okay. Ray, a company should always own the IP, not the university. You may start where the university owns it, but it should always be transferred across if you're going to get any successful exit. And the good universities understand that. So what they tend to do is they have a rollover point at when they will transfer it. Like they own some of the equity in your company. They want to make sure you're a serious company before they transfer you the whole IP. So you may start where you've got a license, and they'll normally give you an exclusive license, but they still own the IP. But if you get to for example, a university may say, if you've raised more than $2 million towards your company, we'll give you the IP. We'll assign it across to you. So there's a part where you've got to get the university to feeling comfortable with what you're doing with their IP and for them. And that's a broad way to look at it. Now, if a university's not giving the inventor of the IP any shares in the IP or whatever, that's their problem. I mean, that's not a good thing. But I'm only addressing getting the IP from the university into the company. Okay.
Just a quick comment. There's a wide range in the United States of practice on licensing from universities. Some universities just have it nailed. They're just cookie cutters for taking stuff out. Stanford is a pleasure to deal with. Some of them are nightmares to deal with. They don't get it. They think the value is in the initial patent, the core investment. They don't get the idea of enabling patents and the work that's going to come later. And the practices vary a lot. I imagine from a technical legal point, it does matter. I've never seen it matter in any startup situation that I know of, whether the patents were owned or exclusively licensed. As long as it was a proper exclusive license, it had no impact on valuations. It had no impact on exit. Licensed patents work just fine. The biggest problem that we tended to run into with licensed patents is the tension in a startup when they're trying to get it out of the university, so they push all the economic impact downstream, the milestones, the trigger payments, the cumulative payments and all that. So then when they go for an acquisition, the acquirer looks at this and says, oh, wait a minute, there's this slug of payments that needs to happen on these various events. So there's some stuff like that you need to watch, but a properly done exclusive license has not been an issue for us.
Okay. Got time for one more question here.
I want to make a question and a comment to the floor, particularly to international visitors. I'm not sure if you're aware that there is no software patents in New Zealand. I mean, it hasn't been treated in the panel very deeply, but we don't know what will happen with the TPPA regulations on that topic, but by law, we cannot patent software in New Zealand. I would be interested to hear comments from the panel on your experience in other countries in general.
Well, I don't know. I'm not familiar with no software patents in China or the United States, but I think software patents are absolutely fair game from my perspective.
Yeah, it's in New Zealand there is now an exclusion in the Patents Act that says no software patents per se, but there are still software patents being filed. They're being packaged up in a way that means that they're not pure software patents. Yeah, I know. And on the other extreme, at the other end of the scale of software patents is the United States, where it's a lot easier. Most of my clients tend not to spend too much money on filing IP protection in New Zealand. They are looking at the States and Europe and China now So we're not filing too many patents in New Zealand for our clients because the opportunities are abroad, and IP protection abroad is where the real value is being established for them.
I'll offer a comment for the international folks, because we're talking about cross-border. And if you're investing in, let's say, companies that are overseas out of your own jurisdiction, right? And then the home company, territory company needs to keep their IP, and you're given a license, right? Make sure that when that you're the licensee, that you also have the rights to the derivative works, because basically you're creating value on top of that initial base value, right? So the question is, if you want to maintain value as an angel investor, make sure that if you're, a shareholder of this offshore company, that you have also the rights to use the original IP, and when you develop new IP on top of that IP, that you have the rights to that actually.
Okay. All right, I've been given the signal to wrap things up, so I'd like to put our hands together for our panel. And, you guys.